Hey guys, welcome to another episode of LFA's Shop. This week we're back on the Toyoace again, and we're going to do a whole bunch of little jobs really quickly, just get some stuff smashed out so we can get done with this thing for now and move on to the other car that's in the back of the shed. Alright, so the idea of this episode is to cross all this stuff off the list, start it, drive it out the shed. So, Tim and I have already done some of that stuff. We got a door handle on, we got a few converter bolts in, we got a rear gearbox bolts in. I then made a transcooler mount off of the transmission crossmember and also off the top of the crossmember off the chassis. So I'll put that back in a minute. We've got the wheel bearings tightened and a split pin put in. Thank you, Tim. I didn't really do that, he did that. The tail shaft is at Aiden's and ready to get the adapter made, so that's happening. Brake lines, I've blocked off one of the valves, which I need to swap over because I blocked the wrong one off. The brakes, I've cleaned the discs, and the transcooler, I've made the mount. So, top of my list right now is transcooler, plumb, and actually install it. So, let's do that right now. Alright, so just under the back of the truck here, got the transcooler all mounted, so that's nice and solid now. Doesn't touch the body, there's a nice gap here, plenty of room around it, so that should be pretty good. The front is a little bit obscured by this cross member, airflow wise, but it is on a bit of an angle, so should be okay. Worst case, I can chuck a fan back here. We're going to try and do without that for now. So the next problem is the hoses are over there, so the transcooler lines are over here, and then I have adapted those. So they're just a Turbo 400 specific adapter to dash 6 and then dash 6 barbs. So that's reasonably easy, and now I just need to run those over here and pump them into here and down here, and then obviously like clamp them up and get them out the road, but that will probably be later. So for now I'm just going to cut them, get them to the right length and get them plumbed onto this transcooler. So we're off to a good start. Seems like this hose is 3/8 and these barbs are 5/16. So there's a couple of millimeters in that, which is not going to make it work. And then down here, we've got a really, really tight fit. So I reckon these barbs are actually the wrong size and this hose is the wrong size. Or these barbs are the wrong size. So that's awesome. I'm just going to call Garage 7 and get some new fittings and hose on the way because this is crappy. All right, transcooler is mounted. The plumbing didn't work, obviously. So I've called Gav. I'll get onto some more stuff for that. Put it aside. Next job, let's mount this shifter. Alright, a little bit of success with that one. So I've got the bolt holes in the bottom there, all screwed in with nutserts, and now it works pretty good. So that's the shifter done for now. I need to do a cable of some description, which I haven't sorted out yet, and I also want to fill this in at a later date. But for now, I just need a cable so we can get this thing moving. Alright, so that's the shifter kind of sorted, so on to the next problem. I need to split these front brake lines for the front brakes. So this master cylinder only has 2 outlets, a front and a rear. Turns out they're actually the same size, like the same restriction because it is a ABS master, but I need to reduce one later. But for now we just want the fronts, so I need to split that from there to 2 different lines for the front brakes, obviously. So I'm just going to do a Y joiner thingy, bolt that through the chassis, 1 to the master and 1 to each brake. So let's jump in and get that sorted. Every single time I do brake lines, I'm like, oh, this is easy. Just be a few fittings, everything will go smoothly, and it's a really bad time. So I've got to here, so I've got the main one coming off the master, coming to this splitter or like Y-piece box, going into this one into the driver's side front. Now I need to run this one down here and then across and then into the other side at the front. Then I need to do another line at a later date from the master to the back, and then we should be all sweet. So I got to here. It is quite annoying. Every time I do this, I forget how annoying it is. So now I need to go from there across, or down across, back up a bit, and then put another block over there. Give us somewhere to mount like this guy, and we'll call it a day. All right, that was one of the most irritating jobs I've done on this ute so far. Brake lines plumbed. They go all the way over the other side. So they come down this side, split into 2, go around the back. And you can't see anything. So they come from the master, split into two in the middle of the screen there, go back along the cross member in front of the engine, into a little clip, and then up to here. I just want to put another clip just there, and then it's all good. So I don't know if this leaks, I haven't tested it yet. I need to make a plunger and stuff for the actual pedal, so I'll get to that shortly. Just trying to decide which job I want to do next. Alright, so it's a new day, but we can finally cross some stuff off the list. So, went to Garage 7, got some transcooler line and some fittings and some hose clamps. Then a mate of mine, Ryan, thank you very much Ryan, gave me this piece of 4-inch 90-degree intake. So that's going to go from the intake to the filter. That can fix that problem. And then we've got this list here, so plumb the trans cooler, intake on, pick up the pickup and install the tail shaft. That's actually on its way here. Thank you Aiden, he's going to drop that off in a second. Then I'm going to move on to the steering, and then the brakes, and then the manifold, and the shift cable, and it just goes down the list. So let's get stuck in. Alright, so we got a Sunday delivery from Aiden. We got a tail shaft spacer. So this guy's got a little recess in it for the lip on the tail shaft, and then it's got a protruding little groove for the actual diff. So this is going to go onto the diff and then the tail shaft onto here. This is just to push the tail shaft forwards a little bit and also clear the pinion nut on the actual diff itself. So I've got some grub screws, some Lawton grub screws for this, and some nylocks. So I'm going to chuck this in the car and we should be good to go. Alright, so that didn't take very long. Just got the two new fittings on here, and then the new hose and the new hose clamps. So I need to make a little bracket to hold these hoses because they're actually quite long. But they're currently just sort of floating around in the air. So got some hose clamps, I'll get some flat bar and we will make a bracket for those. Alright, so Aiden's been and gone. We've got the tail shaft in and the new tail shaft adapter. That is actually quite tricky to get in because the tail shaft is pretty much the length it needs to be and you can't actually get it over the studs. So I bolted the adapter on the grub screws from this side, so held them with this side and then put the nut on the other side. Then put the tail shaft on, then put the grub screws in for the tail this side, and then did the nuts up on this side as well. So it's a bit tricky, but got it there in the end. So I've just been to Sprints. I got the last hose clamp that I need for the air filter, so I can put that on. Need to make a mount to hold it to the engine itself. Then I also got some trans fluid and some fuel, which is on the other side of this wall. And I got a bolt to make the trans line mount. And I think that's about it. So let's get into that. All right, so I got the trans line mounted. So this one's bolted through the trans cross member, just through the bottom. This guy up here is just a little plate that's a little extension. And then just there we've got another little plate. So it's just a bolt through the sump, just a little bit longer. And then I've got a plate coming off that with two hose clamps. So that's all nice and fixed. So then I moved on to the filter in the front, which involved taking the seat out. The filter fits quite nicely. I needed a different silicone joiner, which is a bit annoying because I'd already cut one. But the piece I cut off managed to work, so that worked out alright. The hose clamp I got is actually the wrong size, so I need to take that back or probably just go get another one. And I need to make a mount for this to hold it to the engine so that it doesn't like rattle around a whole bunch. So I'm not sure how I'm going to do that just yet, but I'm going to ignore it for now and move on to the next job. Alright, so you would have seen in a previous episode, I got the steering working, but I need to put it back in first. So I'll do that now, and then I will actually make it work later, which you would have already seen. How's that for confusing? Alright, so I got the steering box back in. I have lubed the joins and actually connected it back to the steering, like to the wheels. So that's good. The brakes are back together. I've got a plunger in there. It's got a bit of a bend in it because that's the only way I could get it to work. It does seem to work pretty good, but there's not a whole lot of travel. So hopefully there's enough to make it all work. Once it's pumped up, it'll be fine because there shouldn't be much movement at all. But for now, when I'm trying to bleed it, it could be a bit difficult because the pedal actually hits the reservoir. So we'll get to that later. But that's all bolted together. Everything should technically work. So then all under here is all done for now. So just looking into the headers. I don't know if you remember, I made this thing. So that goes forwards and then loops up and down over the chassis rail. And I've realized that that's a horrible idea. So this is the other side. So instead of doing curvy things over here, I think I'm going to cut this off and cut here off and just weld that on there, and then have a little like tiny little log manifold, and then have a single exhaust exit out the middle instead of out the end. And then that way it'll drop down right about where the engine mount is, right in line with the step, and then I can run it back for an exhaust at a later date. So that's going to take a lot of time. So I'm going to have to just jump straight into that, cut this one up, cut that one up, and just make them into that. And then I have to try and find my hole saw or die grinder or whatever and make this fit on there. And let's just get it going, because I need to get this thing done ASAP. So when you see that again, it'll be finished. Alright, I wasn't going to film this, but it seems to be going kind of well. So cut this guy off, grind that guy back. Then this one can go on there. Glue that on. Drill a big old hole here, which I'm probably not going to get to today, but so there we go. And then put the pipe like this sort of thing off of there over the chassis rail into the exhaust. So I'm going to glue this on now, and then I will drill a hole later, and I need to do the other side, but I'm going to do this first and make sure it all fits, and then I can get stuck into the other side. Alright, so last night I got the second manifold welded up, got the hole drilled and machined out, or buzzed out, and then this fits on there semi well. It's not great, but it is a MIG, not a TIG, so we'll be fine. And then this first one that I did is all welded up and ready to go. So I just need to weld this up this morning. I couldn't see what I was doing last night when I had it in the car. So that one on the floor is this side. The one on the bench is the other side. So I couldn't see anything on the other side. So now I can. So I chuck this back on, tack it in place, pull it out here, weld it all up, and she'll be done. And then right before I went inside for the night, I had a quick look at the dipstick. So I shortened this 200mm. And I also shortened the inside 200mm pretty much exactly. I think it's 198mm, but we're good. It's fine. So the idea of this is now it'll go in the side of the trans, something like that, and sit out over the chassis rail rather than pointing up at the roof and touching this wood up here where it used to. So I need to make a mount for this so it doesn't spin and flap around on me. So that's another job for later today, but we'll get to that in time. Alright, so I got the last hose clamp for the filter, so that's on and done. So then I also put the accelerator cable on yesterday. It's not mounted or anything, it's just mounted at this end. The brake pedal's kind of doing stuff, but it's not got any fluid in it. The new steering box is in, but it's really tight for some reason, so I'm going to have to look into that. But that'll work for all the mock-up stuff. The steering column mount is welded and painted. Got the little bracket, extra bracket underneath, painted, and the dipstick is painted and pretty much ready to be put in. Then I've sorted out all this stuff, so we're getting a bit more organized. This is pretty much the last of what I need to make it run. The fuel system's been, I've pulled it all apart and starting to work on a mount and plumbing, all of that sort of stuff. So it's going to be a bit of a process trying to get this thing in the right spot, but we'll see how we go. So the fuel tanks need to get mounted in there, and that's making a bit more of a problem than I thought it was going to be. So don't know what I'm going to do there yet, but we'll get there at some point. So I got all the brakes and the steering back together. We've got the new plunger in there. I haven't tried to bleed that yet. Mate's coming around later today. Hopefully we can try and bleed that. Then coming underneath, we've got the headers back on. I realise they're not going to flow very well, but it'll work. So now the spark plug leads don't fit, which is awesome. So I'm going to have to do something with that. Dale mentioned that you can get 90° and actually just put them on the stock leads. So we'll see how we go there. Alright, a lot has happened since that last clip. So to start with, we've got the wiring loom just thrown on. I'm going to go back through this in a minute and just tidy it up. I also don't have any of the injector clips, so I went to the wreckers yesterday and got all the clips for that. The accelerator cable isn't mounted on the other end, it's only mounted on this end. That's pretty much all that's changed in there. The brake pedal is doing stuff. We had to cut a little notch in here so the pedal could come further forwards so that you could actually get more travel so that we could bleed the brakes properly. And we also got the steering all hooked up. So this piece in the middle is very temporary. We didn't have enough length on the piece we had, so we just joined two together. But everything works pretty good. None of the uni joints bind and it does seem okay. So this is probably the easiest things to change if there's a problem once I drive it. So I'm going to just drive it and see if there is a problem, and then we'll go from there. So I do need to remake this cover in the middle, but whether I do that or not is another story. The next problem was the steering box itself was actually really tight. Turns out the plate on the bottom actually puts pressure on a bearing, so that needs to be spaced out correctly. I don't have that gasket anymore, so I've put some little rubber grommets in there at the moment and done it up real tight, and it's actually working. But I need to look into that a bit more later so it can actually hold fluid and all that sort of stuff. Then coming underneath, got the dipstick on and mounted. So that's just mounted to the chassis rail, or like this middle chassis rail, and you can get to it from the side, so that's pretty good. Then I started mounting the fuel pump, the filter, and the fuel pressure regulator. They're a little bit awkward to get to, but you can kind of get to them from the other side over the chassis rail. The gauge you can only read from laying underneath the car, because once I put the fuel tanks in, you're not going to be able to see it from here. So then I went to the shop and got some more fuel hose for this end, and some more fuel hose for that end. And then I got the clamps I needed for the return. So we've got all that stuff here. They only had blue, which is a little bit annoying, but you're not going to see it. Then this is for the fuel pressure regulator to the rail. This is for the fuel tank to the fuel pump. And this one's for the return, so from the fuel pressure regulator to the fuel tank. So we've got those and we've got all the clips. Just need to actually get it all in there and have a tank to aim at. The next thing I need to do is mount the ECU. So I found this box, which is the original out of the Commodore. So I need to find somewhere to put that, and then also do the last of the wiring just to get it fired up. So we're getting there. It's just taking a lot longer than expected. Still waiting on a shifter cable, and we bled the brakes and they seem to work okay. We'll know a bit better when we drive it and it doesn't work, I guess. So I don't have a lot left, but it's just a couple of really annoying jobs. So mount the fuel tank. I don't really have any metal for that, but we'll see how we go today. Wiring and ECU. So I'm going to clean up the wiring and get it ready to just touch on the battery. Mount the ECU somewhere. I'm not sure where that's going to go. Accelerator cable I need to do, which is a bit of a problem because it's that counterlever stuff that I keep talking about. Steering, shorten, and find the tight spot. We did that. Need to look at the tight spot again because I need to make sure that isn't a problem. Shifter cable's not here. Mount the ECU, I said that before. Battery and new earth, I need to do that obviously. Steering split pins, I need to make sure that everything's all good once I've driven it and tighten the split pins. Trans fluid, check wheel bearings, put the seat back in. There's not really that much left, other than there's the spark plugs and the coil packs, which is going to be actually kind of hard. There's not actually that much left, but it's killing me. It's taken many days and we're right there, it's just not quite there. So I'm just working away, building the fuel tanks for the Toyoace. Someone's found himself a little bed. Alright, I'm just working on a fuel tank mount, so I've just mocked up this little rectangle thing, so that slides onto the bottom of the tanks pretty well. Then I'm trying to work out how to mount the actual tank to this, so obviously it sits in it, but it's not actually like held down. So what I'm thinking is this is stainless. I can actually weld mild to stainless, so at worst case I can just put a little tab like off of here and then put a bolt through here, which is probably what I'll end up doing. I was originally going to run a bolt through the side of this frame and through the side of this, but it doesn't actually come up far enough. There's a big rolled edge here, so I need to get past that to then put a bolt in. So that's not going to work. So there's a few options, but I can't think of them, so that's helpful. I could run a little tab up, I guess, off of here, and then run that bolt through up higher, but then I don't want to run a drill through this thing and actually put a hole like through the tank itself. So I think maybe welding tabs to that's the best option. I'm not really too sure at the moment. Another little problem is I was standing here working on this bracket and this came flying at me, and that is the nut off of the tail shaft with the grub screw. So that didn't last. I'm not sure why that's come undone and why only one of them. I don't think I did it up tight enough that it would have snapped it. So we need to look into that later before I drive this thing, because that's going to snap the tail shaft and spit it out immediately. I'm going to work out what I'm doing here, and then I'm going to chuck it onto the car and mount it in there. Alright, I got the fuel tank base in. It's not bolted, but it is sitting there, so this bit's still loose. The legs are bolted to the chassis. So I've got 4 legs with little T-pieces on top just to hold it all at the right height. And then that top piece will get bolted to this, so I can take it all apart if I need to. But I want to get the tanks in and make sure it all fits. And then I will mark some stuff and drill some holes and bolt this guy on permanently. And then I might just ignore the fuel tanks actually needed to be strapped down for a while, and I'll come back to that. Well, that fits exactly perfect. Didn't measure height-wise where it was going to sit. I just made sure it cleared everything on the bottom half. That ridge is right what I was aiming for. So that's the widest part of the tank. There's a couple of them as you go up. So I was hoping that that would be right in line with the tray top, which I managed to fluke. So you can see both tanks have that little ridge and they're both sitting flat with the tray. So that's really good. So next I need to put on the fuel line, which I've just cut to length. And I just realized that if I put that on there, it's going to be kind of difficult to get off. I could just do it under the fitting, but the fitting that's welded to the tank is a bit rusty, so I actually put some goo on there. Not really supposed to do that, but I'm hoping I can get away with it. So now what I think I should do is probably actually mount this guy to the legs and then mount the tank to this guy. So I'm not sure how I'm going to do that just yet. Probably, I kind of want to weld a plate on and then put a bolt through the whole lot, but I'm not really sure how to do that. So I'm just going to keep playing with it and we'll get there, but you can see that it actually does clear everything. Just. This whole thing is just. Everything just clears. So that's really cool. I'm actually really happy with that. So that's one of the last massive hurdles. So I've got a fuel tank. So we've got fuel lines, everything's done there. Electrical, I need to drill a hole over there and do a grommet and stuff, but I'll probably do that later. I'll probably just run a battery up top rather than the one that's supposed to be down the bottom, just for now, so I can move it. And then I've got to do this accelerator cable, which I could ignore because I can just like reach down. I'll just sit here and reach down and I can drive it, and then use the brakes obviously. So that's a bit awkward. Then there's a little bit of stuff in the steering I need to sort out, and I need to extend the coil pack wires so that they are on the chassis rail, and then get some leads that actually work. And I think that's about it. So we're really, really close. This is day 538 or some crazy number, but we're very close. All right, so that last clip was filmed over a month ago. There's been a bit going on since. So I've moved the car out of the shed. It didn't run, unfortunately. I was trying to get it to run in this episode, but I didn't get time. So in theory, we're very close for this thing to start up and run. It needs a shifter cable, it needs a fuel tank mount, and it needs the coil pack mounted. And that's pretty much it, and it should start and drive. The tail shaft's causing me some issues and I don't have time, so I've moved it out of the shed, and then we're going to get onto that other car that's in the back of the shed because that needs to be done very soon. So I'll get that done and then we'll get straight back on the Toyoace and we'll get it running and driving in the next episode you see of the Toyoace, I hope. So thank you very much for watching and we'll see you next week.